And record. All right, welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to go into our last actual lecture, Django. Today we're covering authentication and creating our user model. You guys looking at that and how that works a little bit with yesterday's demonstration for code with Sam. And today we're going to learn how to do that ourselves for our own application. Uh, so when it comes to authentication, there are multiple different types. And here within the curriculum, you're going to find three different ones. And these are very common and basic ones. The one that we will utilize within our curriculum and that you will be shown for your project will be the token authentication. But it's still important to know that there are other forms and what they are, right? Have authentication, and essentially what it is a very simple authentication mechanism where the client provides a username and a password with every request. And with that request, what happens is it gets added to an authorization header. And then the server receives this password, and usually what happens with this password, it gets hashed in a way that it can't be easily decrypted. So we can send it to our server. We receive this password, which we then enter into our database, right? The pros of basic authentication is the fact that it's very simple to implement and you don't need cookies. The con is that credentials are sent with every request, right? So that does require you to have HTTPS to prevent interception. And there's no actual logout mechanism. The next one we will cover is going to be the session authentication, which is you've probably seen it before. If you ever spent too much time,
Your microphone is cutting in and out pretty bad.
thank you, James. How is it, my friend? Better?
So far, so good.
All right. Let me know if it does cut off. Maybe we can take a slight pause until it gets better or something. Next one we will talk about is the session authentication, which should seem a little familiar. As I mentioned before, my mic rudely cut me off. If you ever spent a little bit too much time on a website and then you came back and you see like some kind of message that says like your session has expired, right? It was probably using some form of session authentication. Essentially, it's a mechanism where the server maintains a user session after login. So the login portion, the way it works, you provide the username and password via the login form. The server then validates your credentials and creates a session, usually a record, which is stored in a database. And then a session ID is sent to the client as a cookie, right? For any subsequent requests afterwards, the client sends the session ID cookie with each request. And then the server retrieves the session data using the session ID and authenticates the user. And then upon logout, the server invalidates the session data. All right, so some pros and some cons to these is the pros will be secure since their credentials are only sent once, where in the basic authentication, these credentials are sent for every single request. For the session, it's only sent once. Another pro is the server-side control over these sessions. For cons is just the sole fact of having to store all the session data, and then scaling can also be very challenging. Now, for the actual authentication we will use, we are going to use token authentication. All right. So what is it? All right. In layman's terms, is a stateless authentication, right? And essentially the server issues a token whenever you log in. And what this token is, it is some form of like random numbers and integers, right? It's just randomly generated it almost looks like a key. Well, I mean, it is a key, right? A randomly generated key, similar to what your Django project has, right? Similar to the keys that you get issued when you create an API and something like that, right? So the server essentially issues a token once it's provided the credentials that it requires, which will be the username and the password. Um, and it uses that token to do everything else, right? So whether I am my playlists, whether I am checking out my profile settings, every time I move to a new page, or whether if I want to do like a new action, like a new request, I use that token that was issued to me at the very beginning of the login. Right. Think of it kind of like when you go into you guys like to go dancing and you go to a club, right? They kind of stamp you right on your hand, and then you can leave and then kind of do stuff around as long as you have that stamp on, right? Or like if you're like at the carnival, you might have to stamp the bracelet, right? That's your token. That bracelet that you use to come in and out, or to use rides, let everybody else know that you've been authenticated, you paid right through the entrance, and now you have access to everything else that you can. Same concept with the token, right? How it works: upon login, you provide the credentials to the server, username and password. And then the server validates the credentials and returns your token. So it takes your password and username, it compares it to the database, like, do you exist? If so, I'm going to go ahead and generate you, right? And then everything else afterwards, it's going to ask for the token. Hey, let me see your token. Okay, all right, you pass. Here's the information you're requesting from me, right? Typically, when a token is created, there is a timer on a token, right? I believe it's called like a life timer. There's a term for it, right? But there is on that token. Um, there is a way to give them a new token. And I'm pretty sure you probably have heard the term like a refresh token before if you've looked through these different APIs, right? So you can get issued a token to begin with, and then do your refresh token to ensure that you can continue using or having access to your information. And that all comes with token authentication. All right, so the pros of this is that it is stateless, so nothing is like saved anywhere, not within like your cookies, and stuff like that, like in none of your data. You just use that one token. Um, how we will keep track of the token, it will use local storage, which can be a pro or a con, um, depending on how you see it. It is very suitable for mobile and third-party integrations. And the con is kind of going back to the local storage is that token theft, right? Can lead to unauthorized access. It could be a little easy to grab this token by accident. So there's pros and cons to using the token. All three of these methods that we talk about are fairly popular. There are other methods as well that you can find yourself, but it's just one example, right? It's pretty cool because we didn't get taught this when we came in. At least I don't remember. Um, so it's nice to know or to show you guys that there is other methods besides just token authentication. All right, so let's do a little drawing to kind of get an idea of how this is supposed to work. We have our first rectangle, which is going to be our client. And then we have our other rectangle, which will be our server, right? And let's expand it a little bit. Okay, move this bad boy to the right. So let's say you reach the login page, right? You are the login page, or not even login page. Let's say sign up page. Sign up. If you sign up or login, either or, it's okay. Sign up or login, right? You're here, and you want to essentially access your account. So what would happen is you would submit a form. You guys should be very familiar. where you add your email, your name, right, date of birth, yada yada. Whether you're signing up or you're logging into your account, you fill out a form. On submit, it puts in some form of a request via a function, right? And who can kind of give me an idea of what that request might be and how it would look like? Let's say the scenario is I'm just going to go ahead and sign up. What kind of request would a sign up be? What would the be? And I know
I
you
think
guys
it's
don't.
post or
Yep.
create.
Yeah, it'll probably be some kind of like post request. Good stuff one, right? How would the endpoint creating your endpoint for a user, right? From what you guys already know, when you're creating your Pokemon, your moves, working with the noun project, the individual assignments, if you had to recreate this, right, and you're creating a user, how would that endpoint?
You talking about starting right from the beginning, like API slash V1 slash
API v1, yeah. Um,
sign up.
you're on the you're on the right track. We want to make a specific endpoint for all you. But that would be next, James. Yeah. We probably do like sign up, right? Our endpoint will probably look something very similar to this. We might want to, for sure, at least have the endpoint where we can get users, and then from this fix, we can create separate endpoints for our user model, where it could be sign up, right? Or it could be a login or log out, and all this is handled from the user endpoint, right? Make sense? Yeah, so we create our users endpoints. The users is plural for all users, right? And then the specific point for the user itself, like, are we going to log out? Are we going to log in? Or are we signing up? So yeah, so we would have a sign up, right? We would create a sign up endpoint. And to combine what we learned yesterday, right? If I was creating a new user, how would I probably grab this information, or how would I send this information from my client to my server so my server can have access to it? What's a method that we talked about yesterday that we can send all this data in? Juan, you're muted. Are you speaking?
Axios, and then pass it through the body.
Yeah, right. Whether it's Axios or any other form of creating your request, it'll have the ability to add some form of header, right? And in the header, you can create like some form of body header where you can this data, right? Which we call it the response body, right? So we'll probably have like body, and then it'll be some kind of JSON object, and within here we would have like username, right? And then you would take the input that was added within the sign up form and pass it in here, or it would actually be like the username, right, that they gave you. And then we would probably take in also password. We'll pass in the password. And depending how complex you want to like make your model, or how much information you wanted for your username, you might take other stuff, right? But we're gonna keep it fairly simple for today's lecture, right? So this gets created, and it gets sent. It gets sent to our server, and then our server is going to receive this request. It comes through, the request. We grab it. Our server checks the endpoints. It sees it's trying to reach the user's endpoint, so it directs it. It goes through our settings.py, our project folder. It goes into urls.py. It looks for the endpoints. Okay, I see I have a urls.py with a user's endpoint, right? It goes in there. Oh, okay. Within this path, it's telling me to include my user app, right? So then it references the user app, right? And this is how it's all connected. It gets there. It sees that there's a sign up endpoint within this app. And within this sign up endpoint, there is a specific view for sign up, right? And that would be something like this, where we have class like sign up, right? Which is inheriting from our API view. And within this class, we might have a post method, right? That's taking itself request. And we see here that there's probably body data here. We're not using any kind of arguments within the URL path. So all we really need is this. And then somehow within my post method, I'm doing like something like request.data.copy. I'm grabbing the data, using the information, so on and so forth, right? We're going to elaborate more on this with actual code, so I'm not going to continue here. But once my method gets ran and the user is created, we talked about token authentication. So what should happen is once my user has signed up, I have created that user in my database. What my server should be doing is create a token, right? It creates a token and then assigns it to that new user that we just created, right? And now, what happens when you usually sign up on a website? Usually, it takes you to your new profile that you just created, right? But you shouldn't have access to that profile unless you've been authenticated. So when the new user is created, they should receive some form of token, letting them know, hey, you have been authenticated. You now have access to our services or your profile. Whether it's a Spotify account, here's your new library, right? With no playlists and no songs, but here it is, right? Stuff like that. So once this request happens, the server should return a response, right? And this response should have like maybe some form of status code, right? As well as the token back to the user so they can use that token to access the rest of the site on the front end, right? And we're going to stop here for the drawing so we can actually see this in code. But this is kind of where we're going to start this morning. Do I have any questions about how the overall flow of authentication should work? Yes, James.
Is the token we create something that is a new token recreated each time that user logs in, or is that token that's created stays the same and is always associated with that one user?
That's a great question, James. Yeah, so I think by default, the token has a 1 hour expiration, if I remember correctly. But no, it does not stay forever. Every time that a user logs out, we should destroy that token, and a new token should be recreated the next time they log in, right? If you want to manipulate the expiration, there is ways of manipulating the token. We're not going to talk about that during today's session, right? But there are ways to get more in depth into like the authentication portion and make refresh tokens and whatnot. We're staying kind of like at the top level here, but yeah, there is ways to kind of let them have a token for like an hour or less time. Think of a bank, right? Have you ever logged into your bank app? Within like 5 minutes, man, it logs you out like, yo, what the heck, right? That's probably because they lower the session duration, or maybe the token expiration is significantly smaller, right? And they do that for a reason, right? For security purposes. But yeah, so you are able to manipulate that, and then they might not allow you to have a refresh. They might make you have to log back in, like my freaking bank. Thanks, Wells Fargo, right? But they might make you do that, and it's all for security purposes, right? It's not because they're trying to be mean, but it's to protect your privacy. So does that answer your question, James?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Juan, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, on the same note for the tokens, we don't have to worry about saving this. We're not going to save this into our database or anything crazy, right?
No, the token won't be saved. What would happen is we will receive the user email, right? We will save the user email, but we will create this token and send it back to our clients, right? And then our clients will use that on the front end, right? And then you'll see that more at play whenever we go into our full stack week and we combine the back end and the front end, right? That token that's being sent to our client, and this might be very familiar James, or anyone that was during that attended FOP, if you guys remember the local storage and manipulating that, that's exactly what you will be doing. Right? You would manipulate the local storage. That token is being received, you add it in there. And then whenever you move pages, or you want to do something, you can check the local storage to see if you have a token or not. When you log out, you delete the local storage, right? That's where that comes into play. And then I was clicking, huh? Now it's clicking. But yeah, that's how that works. But good question, Quan. I appreciate it. I see the chat is popping off. Everyone's telling me good morning. Thank you all. There are just no ATMs anywhere. USA reimburses you for another ATM. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. I do
We're
have.
talking about banking stuff.
I know.
We just said
like-
Wells Fargo's trash.
Yes, Lynn.
Wells Fargo's.
I've been listening, but obviously not close enough. You're talking about using the REST framework off token model, like importing token from. That's what's going to happen.
Correct.
So Django, this is part of the batteries built in. Django will store the token in the back end, and like Roger said, you'll send it to the front and then handle it later. Learn that later. Don't worry about it now. But Django does hold it in the admin section, and then when you go back and log out, it goes in there and it deletes it. And so it's part of the process, and Roger will show it as we go through here.
Oh, thanks, Lynn. I haven't
No worries.
deliberately looked at that table, but I know in my code I never deliberately saved it, so I figured like, oh, I don't think it's saving it because I don't have to.
Admin, it's part of the batteries included. Admin manages it for you. Like, you do not have to think about that. The plumbing is already there. It creates it, it holds onto it, and then when you log out, it destroys it. And you can see this in the admin screen, which Platoon says is optional, and Len Kedro says highly recommend using. It makes it
we
easier
will look
to-
at it.
Yeah.
For sure, we will look at it. Thank you for that, Lynn, and I appreciate that. We will definitely check out our admin site today and see what it's doing.
Be awesome.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. My bad, Lynn. That was
Oh, you're good.
rude.
No, I was talking too much anyways. We're good.
All right, so the actual authentication, guys, we're gonna go ahead and set our stuff up. Let's close this up. I am currently within the exact same project that we were working on with yesterday. I just copied it into the user authentication for today. Notice I am within my manage.py directory, and I do have my my virtual environment turned on. So let's actually get into our authentication. So first and
Can you
foremost,
zoom in when you get a chance?
absolutely, James. Thank you for that. Len, your hand is still raised unless you have another question. If not, we'll move forward. So for our user, for your regular projects, you will probably want to create a form of a user app, right? Because this is Pokemon, right? We're still trying to stick to that concept. Our app is going to be called trainer_app, right? So as you guys should already know, it probably won't be too much use to ask you guys anymore because you guys are past this. But to create a new app, we're going to say Python manage.py, and we are going to start a new app, which is going to be our trainer app. All right, our trainer app. So this is the current demo directory that I've been working on, and here is my new trainer app. Up to this point, we know that whenever we create a new app, we do have to connect it to our project. So we open up our project directory, navigate to settings.py, and we want to ensure that it is within our installed apps. Trainer app. Right, so we have our trainer app. Now, when it comes to the authentication, the token authentication comes from REST framework. And we already have it installed because we've been using it for our views, right? We have Django REST framework. It's been installed. I even have the installed app here, right? But the actual portion of token authentication has to be installed manually as well. So although we have REST framework, the app for it isn't in our installed apps. So what has to happen is within installed apps. I'm gonna add it with my REST framework. We are going to install our REST underscore framework dot auth token, right? This app comes from the Django REST framework that we installed. We just have to ensure that our project is utilizing, right? I didn't just pull it out thin air. You can check documentation. It is something that's provided for you. We just haven't needed it, so we are going to use it. Django does have a default authentication method that the project automatically has. And what we are going to do is essentially just tell our Django project, hey, I do not want to use the default version. I want to create my own authentication and my own user. That way I can, customize it how I see fit, right? And that's what we have to do right now for our setup. So we add the formal authentication we want to use, which is the auth token app, right? So we have the app, but Django still doesn't know that we want to use this for authentication, right? It just knows that these are one of the apps that I want installed. So to install it, we need to specify to REST framework that I want to use auth token. And what you're going to find is that there's nowhere here to, oh, I did, this is something else, my bad. I was trying to manipulate the datetime format for my pictures, but it didn't work. But essentially what's going to happen is you have to create what this is here. Jacob, you do have a hot mic.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you just so before you move on, you forgot a comma after the authorized token.
Thank you. That would have broken my project. Appreciate. Thank you for that. I shouldn't have had this here because we have to create it. But imagine if you never saw this. Your project doesn't have anywhere to add any kind of settings to your REST framework, so we have to add that ourselves, which is what you just saw there. And we do that by creating a variable called REST framework, all caps and an underscore between it. Right. This is going to allow me to let REST framework know certain settings that I want to adjust within it. And what I want to adjust is going to be the authentication that REST framework uses. And this is going to be within a dictionary. So curly brackets, and then I'm going to press enter. Within here, I'm going to create a key value pair. The key will be in all caps default underscore authentication underscore classes. We're telling REST framework, hey, this is what I want to use for my default authentication. And then the value for it is going to be a dictionary, right? So it's a dictionary within a dictionary. I open up my curly brackets, press enter. And then what I actually want to use for my default authentication, it's going to be open quotation marks, single quotes, REST underscore framework dot authentication dot token authentication. Exactly like this. This comes from the docs. If you're wondering where I'm pulling this from, this isn't just like stuff that I'm making up. If you want to know where this comes from, you can check documentation. This is how Django or the REST framework wants to receive it, so it knows that it's going to use token authentication. All right. We are specifying to REST framework, hey, the authentication we are going to use is going to be specifically the token authentication. Is everyone still with me? Let me see that chat. All right. No questions? All right. So we created a new application. And what we have to do is make migrations. Why do we have to make migrations if we didn't create a model? Well, we added a new application into our project, and there are some things that come with the auth token that we need to ensure that our database is tracking. So within here, within my manage.py directory, I'm going to say Python manage.py, make migrations. No changes detected, but when I migrate, you're going to see something interesting. Oh, okay. That's weird. That was very interesting. For those of you that are running this, did anybody get an error? No, everyone's good.
What is your error?
When you made migrations, when you migrate, did you get any error here saying about something about authentication tables or no? No,
No, I'm
nobody.
not following along, but I do know in your that REST framework that you created, you put a dictionary within a dictionary. I don't know if that's supposed to be a list.
It is supposed to be a list. Thank you very much, James. You always keep me in check, man. I appreciate it. It is supposed to be a list. My bad. Improper syntax. That's probably why I didn't get an issue. As a matter of fact, before I make this migrations again, let me go ahead and connect to my Pokédex database. All right, let's go ahead and make migrations again. Migrations. All right. Let me go ahead and draw my database. So what's going to happen here, what should have happened is I would have gotten an error from trying to migrate if I didn't have this different syntax. But what happened is I would have gotten an error. And let me explain that why. Well, because when we initially made migration, we first started our project, Django added stuff like authorization, right? And these came by default from this installed app, right? If I did not mess up the import, what would have happened, and which is why I was very confused, is I would have gotten some kind of issue of conflict. The conflict would have been that, hey, like you can't migrate a new token authentication because your database is tracking a different form of authentication. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go back real quick for the sake of ensuring that you guys know this and you see it happen within your database. I'm going to go ahead and, yeah, I'm going to drop my DB. Let me quit this. I'm going to drop DB, drop database Pokédex DB, and then I'm going to quit from it. One other session is using it. What are you talking about, guy? Oh, my bad. There we go. Drop DB, and I'm going to go ahead and create the DB again. Python manage.py, make migrations. Python manage.py, migrate. Okay. So it should be back to how it was. Let me go ahead and connect into my database. Yeah, so these are the defaults of authentication that we have, and that's coming from django.contrib.auth. So it already has a default version of authentication, but when we come in here and we add our changes of REST framework dot auth token, We installed a new REST framework setting for our default class. Default authentication classes. And I have to do this for you guys because I know you might run into this issue. And I want to make sure that it is recorded so you see how that works. Token authentication. Let me make sure I have everything correct in here before I move forward. REST framework, authentication. Okay, we should be good here. Let's go ahead and make the migrations. No change detected. Migrate. That is so weird. Okay, I guess we can get error. But going back, it does happen. I'm really surprised why it did not drop the error for me. But if it does, the only thing that you need to do is drop the database and then recreate it with your new changes. Do I have any questions on this step? I don't want to spend too much time here if it didn't give me the error. Okay. All right. So we have that in there. We talked about how that works. Let's go ahead and actually look at our table. So we have two tables actually, which is auth user. All right, and we also have auth token that I want to look at. So let's see, /D auth user. And this is our new user that we have. Notice that there's different columns that it takes. ID, password, username. All right, so it's able to say the username and password. We see the type that it is characters. We see the limit. We see a column called isSuperUser, which is a Boolean. So whenever we create users, we have the option of making them super users that can be admin, right? Or just regular users. First name, last name, we have different columns here for staff, right? So if they're part of your staff or not. We have is active, so we can keep track if there's accounts within our application that are no longer active. Like let's say someone decides to disable their account for some time, you could use that to add that feature. Think of, if you have Instagram, you're able to deactivate your account for a while if you wanted to, and then reactivate it, right? If you wanted to ban the user, you're able to switch the is active to false to ban them, but still keep record of this person to make sure that they don't come back, right? So you can use the is active for that. And then we see the different constraints that go to that. Let's check out the auth token. And this is the token table that we will be utilizing to create the tokens for a user. It takes 3 columns. One is a key. This will be the actual token itself, right? We have a created column, which is a timestamp with time zone. So we know when we create it, we can use that to kind of create some kind of duration of how long that token lasts, right? So once it elapsed, like after an hour, you can destroy that token, right? So we can use the created to our advantage. And then we see a user ID, and this is where I believe the relationship is at. Here we see foreign key constraints, auth token token user ID, right? It's a foreign key, right? The user ID, and it's referencing the auth user ID from the other table that we saw earlier, right? So when we create a user and assign it a token, it does add that relationship to it, right? And I can only assume that this is probably a one-to-one relationship. Do I have any questions on the tables that we just created using the token table or the new user authentication? This is just a setup so we can actually have somewhere to save our user, right? All right, let's get into actually creating our user. In our project, we are calling them trainer app. We are going to navigate to the models.py. So for this user model, we are going to import a user class that we will utilize to inherit from. And we're going to get this from Django.contrib.auth.models, right? Notice that this is coming from the default class that came with our Django project, right? That is from this installed app, right? So we are going to use the default user. We are going to inherit from it so we can create a custom user. And then we will use the REST framework to create a token to get to that user. So we are using the default version of their user, but we just want to be able to customize it to how we see fit. And from this model, I want to import abstract user. We are then going to create our trainer, so class trainer. Once again, if this was a different app, this could be a user, right? But we are sticking to the concept of Pokemon, so we'll call it trainer. And we are inheriting from the abstract user. And the only field we are going to add here is going to be email. And we'll talk about that in a second. For the email, it's going to be models.email field. It will have a max length of 255. The email needs to be unique, right? You shouldn't have different users trying to make an account using somebody else's email. So it has to be unique. And we are going to add another attribute here, which is you've probably not seen before, but it's going to be called verbose name, right? And the verbose name we're going to give it is going to be email address, right? And what that essentially does, it almost creates a nickname for this field that is more user-friendly. Obviously, email is still user-friendly, but if you wanted to have something different to take in, that might be more complex as an actual name, you can give it something that's user-friendly for our client to be able to grab, right? A little bit, something more specific. Hey, it has to be an email address, right? That's what the verbose is doing, is just kind of giving it a nickname. Do you have any questions on the email field before we move on? Is verbose name needed? No, it's not really needed. You could still do this without email. It's just like a quality of life thing that we can add to it. Afterwards, there are two fields that the user model requires, right? Well, by default, a user needs a username. It needs a username, right? We did not add a username field here, right? And because we didn't add a username email field or a username field, we added email instead. We have to let our user model know that for our username field, we want to use the email field that we created. Well, Roger, why are we doing this? Why don't we just create a field called username? Well, it's common practice, which I'm sure you've seen through other applications that you've used, that you typically create a account using your email address. One, because email address can be unique, right? And it keeps things constant for the users that interact with your application than trying to create a unique username for your application, right? It kind of just goes on par with practices of not making it more difficult for your user to have to create some kind of, ridiculous username. You just keep it unique to something that you know is already usually unique, right? Not many people have the same email address. When you create an email address, it tells you that it's already taken. So we are leveraging the fact that email addresses is unique to begin with, and we're going to use that as our username. By default, our user model requires the user but we want to take in an email address and set it to the username. Does that make sense to you guys? We're essentially just overriding that username field. Like, hey, I don't want you to take in something like, you know, let's say Rogelio de la Garza, you know, 123 or whatever, 324, whatever, right? I don't want to get username like this where they're very unique or very specific like this. I want them to be specifically email addresses. So we're just overriding that username field with the email field that we created. Make sense, guys? I want to make sure we understood that concept. And then there is one more field that we need, and it's called required fields. And required fields, it allows you to add, let's say, for example, you had like date of birth, right? You made this models equals to date field, right? You had something else like you know, city is equal to models dot char field and other stuff, right? Just like on other forms. You have the option to make all these fields required for your username model, and you would come down here and you would say date of birth, right? And then you would do city, making these fields very required. Yes, Juan.
That being said, is email by default required because it's under username and we don't have to add it to required fields?
That was the next part. Absolutely. It's because by default, the user needs password. We don't have to add anything in here because by default, it's gonna need for us to pass in a password, even though we don't declare it here and say password, it's still going to expect the password, right? So we don't have to create it, and we don't even have to add it to required fields because it's going to make you give it a password anyways. The username is being overridden by the email field, so we know that username is assigned to email, and by default, it requires a username, so therefore we don't have to add email in here or username because it's going to make you give it to the model anyways, right? And because of that, since we have no other fields we're going to use for our model, we don't have to add anything in here, but it still needs to be declared. If you don't add the required fields here, you're going to have issues. Even though you have nothing that you have to specify in there, it expects that field here. Does anybody have any questions about the username field or the required fields? All right. Now, before we make any migrations, now that we have this model, we're going to do one more setting. And that's to tell our project, hey, instead of using Django.contrib.auth as the user model, I now want to use the new trainer model I created. So we're going to go to, and you can generally honestly just put it anywhere within here. I'm just going to put it at the very bottom. But what we have to do is create a new variable called auth user model. And then we assign it the new model we created. Trainer app.trainer. Therefore, overriding that default user model that Django comes with. Yes, James.
The required field that you left an empty list. I think I might have missed what you said. It can remain empty because the email and username is there by default, or no?
Correct. If I didn't even add an email here, right? And didn't add a specific username field, it's going to require anyways a username and a password. Even if it is not specifically added here, by default, it already requires it. the required fields still needs to be declared. And it's there in the event you want to create other fields like a date of birth, right? Or if you want to add city, state, address, right? Ethnicity. If you have some other fields that you would need, these aren't by default required by the user model. So if you wanted to make them required, you would add them in here, right? This is if you had other fields that you need to make required. But by default, the already requires a username and password. So even if I don't add in here, it's still gonna force me to give it a username and the moment I try to instantiate a user. So that's why we don't have email field in here, because by default it's already included. Owen, I saw your hand up first.
Yeah, can you go back to the settings.py? Because what did you put? Yeah, I just needed to see the auth user model declaration.
Sure thing. James?
Back to the models. Sorry.
I'll let him copy.
Once-
I'll give him 30 seconds, but
Yeah,
can you
it's
ask a
all good.
question right before?
I think so. You said both email and password are required when we do username fields. Do we not have to declare a password in the models, or does that come later?
No, we do not. We don't even have to declare password.
You cut out.
Your
right
your
there.
mic cut out, Roger.
We can't
Still
hear
can't
you,
hear you.
Roger.
Roger,
I think
we
his
can't.
headset died.
Roger. Roger.
We can't hear anything.
Just like everyone raise your hand in the thing, and maybe he'll pay.
We can't hear you, Roger. Did he just go away?
He just
Everyone raise their hand. I'm so sorry. My mic, man, it is my kryptonite.
It
What
was
the
like
last-
right when you were about to go into James's question, and then
All
it
your
just cut
explanation
out.
was lost, yeah.
Yeah, so as I mentioned to you, by default, it's gonna require you a password, right? It's gonna require you a username too. But I wanted to override the username field in email field, which is why I specifically declared email, right? So I can override it. But even if I didn't add this email field, it'll work just as fine because by default it still expect a username. By default, it's still gonna want a password. Now, in the event that I wanted to get creative with my password, I could specifically create a password field. That way I can customize it how I see fit by adding a max length of like, let's say 25, right? I might want to add a validator to my password if I don't want to take special characters. So I could do that, right? That's the time that I would password, but because I'm keeping it simple, and I don't want to go into in-depth of creating validators because that's not the reason for the class. I'm not going to create a customized password field, but people, even if I don't add a password or email, still going to require it. Therefore, I don't need to add it to required fields. It's already required, no matter what. Does that answer your question,
Awesome.
James?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So we have our model here, but Django is still, as of right now, utilizing this user as its default. So we have to tell our project, hey, I just created a new user, and this is the user I want you to track and use now. And we do that by creating this variable called auth user model, and then pass it in the model of the user. And this is very specific. You have to do auth user model, or you're gonna get some error. If you don't link this in this manner, where you call the application and then the name of the model with it capitalized, if it was capitalized, then you will have an issue too. So this is very specific. It wants it like this. And this way it can see that, hey, I now have a new user and this is what I am going to use. Do I have any questions, guys? Okay. I have no questions. No more Team Boot headsets for Roger. Sam, this is very expensive. I don't think you understand. I'm like really disappointed on its performance because I spent a lot of money on it. All right. It sucks because like since the moment I bought it, people have been making fun of me and like in games telling me like, yo, you have like a horrible mic. Like, what are you like broke? I'm like, oh, dude, like this is expensive. All right. Let's go ahead and move forward. So we now have a model, and we need to make sure that our database is tracking that. So we're going to go ahead and make migrations. So we'll say Python manage.py make migrations. And I think this is now where I'm going to get that error. So we create that trainer, and then we can migrate. There we go. This is what I was waiting for. I was waiting for it to break, man. It's going to say admin 001 initial is applied before the dependency of trainer app, right? So it's saying that, hey, the initial admin user I had was put into the database, and now you're trying to add a new user, but there is a conflict of interest here. Why do you have both in your database, right? And it's breaking because of that. And right before I put you guys on break, the way to fix this is just like I did earlier, where I dropped the DB. Let me go ahead and quit this. We're going to drop database, Pokédex DB, and then we are going to recreate that database as such. We can then migrate. And now when I come into my database, Pokédex DB, and I open it up, I want you to notice that, where is it at? I don't see it anymore. Did I do something wrong? I don't think I did. Make migration. I think we're good. Yeah, we're good. Okay, yeah, we are good. But now it actually allowed me to make those migrations, right? Because before I had made migrations prior to creating that user, and it didn't know how to load them up into my database because of the order, right? And that's one thing I wanted to point out. If you get that issue, you might have to drop your data, prevent this from happening, and having to like maybe add all your Pokemon into fixtures and whatnot. What I recommend is one of the first things that you do when you create your project, your personal projects, your group projects, or any kind of other project in the future that utilizes Django, is first you might want to tackle your user model before you create every other model out there, right? Before you make any migrations, set up your project, create the model, and then make the migrations. I see Juan, you have a question?
Actually, we're kind of just touching on it. So that being said, we should probably, when we're making our sample data for like our personal project and all that stuff, we should put this stuff in like a JSON file or something that we can just, when we recreate it, if need be, we can always just reload that data.
Yes. So for those of you today who are going to probably go back and do this on your school database, what you should do if you don't want to lose all your data is do a dump data into your fixtures, right? Into a JSON file, drop the database, and then make the migrations, and then once again, load up your fixtures. Cool? All right. Time is 10:02. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Let's get back at 10:12, and we will continue with class. All right, welcome back, everybody. We left off on our models for our trainer. We made migrations into our database. Our database is now tracking our trainer app model. And we can go ahead and move forward the class and talk about the initial part of at the beginning of class, which is our endpoints, right? So creating users and creating the endpoints. So if I want to create an endpoint for my trainer model, how should I start? What is the first step that I should probably do?
Do you want to add it to your project URLs?
Yeah, I want to add it to my project URLs, right? We add that the base of my points, so I can open up my Pokédex project, go to URL paths. I don't think we need it anymore. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. We are past that. We have evolved. All right, these are the only endpoints that I need, and the only thing I need is code. And down here, I'm going to create a new path. The path is going to be AP1, version 1, and it's going to be users. Just like everything else where it's all plural, we will create our user endpoint. And instead of doing the views here, I want to create multiple other paths that can branch off users. So I'm going to go ahead and link that to another URLs path where I can do all that. And that's going to be my trainer app.urls. All right. Now it doesn't exist yet, so I have to go to my trainer app. And in my trainer app, I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be called urls.py. In here, I need to import the path method. So I'm going to say Django.urls import path. And I can create specific URL patterns that relate to my users. And there's a couple paths that we want to do. One is going to be for signing up our user. We want to create one for logout, create one for login, and maybe create an endpoint to grab all the info that belongs to this user. Right? For the sign up one, we will start our path. And this should be, what do you guys think this should be? It goes back to the TL draw.
Forward slash sign up or sign up forward slash.
Yeah, sign up forward slash. We don't have to add that forward slash behind it because that's within our urls.py. So good catch on that. So sign up forward slash. And then what I want this to include is going to be a sign up method that I'm going to create as views. Was it as views or as view? I don't remember. This always gets me. As view. Yep. Right. And then I'm gonna give it a related name, or actually name here. Name is going to be sign up. And this could be for testing purposes. Now, obviously I get those quick lines because those views don't exist yet. So I'm gonna just go ahead and create all these. The next one was a logout. There should be a view called logout with a name of logout. Next is my login path from a view called login.as view with a name of logout. And last but not least, I'm going to create a path for my info. And this will be an info view with a name of info, right? They don't exist yet, so I do have some squiggly lines, but I'm going to go ahead and add the imports. I'm going to say from.views, imports, sign up, log out, log in, and info. These are still white because they don't exist, but my paths are created. This is how it should all look for my sign up, log out, log in, and info. Right. And notice these are 4 different paths. We can get a little bit more in deep. We can create even more deeper paths in this, which it makes no sense to try to do all these URLs within my Pokédex project URLs, right? We already have a good amount for different things. And that's the reason why we use the include method to separate those concerns. Yes, Jacob.
For on line 10, you have login, the name being log out.
Thank you. That would have definitely given me an issue if I was trying to test it out. Log in. All right. So I went ahead and just created these now, so I'm not going back and forth between my files. And now we can go to our views. So the first one we are going to tackle is the sign up one. So within my views, there are a couple things that we have to import, and we'll take them one at a time. And at the very end, we can talk about them. Well, first and foremost, I want to import my model of trainer. So from .models, I want to import trainer. We are creating a class view, so we have to import from REST framework .views import API view. We know that this is supposed to handle requests, so we have to send a response back to our client. So we need the response method. So we have to say from REST framework .response import response. We are going to have to use status of HTTP, so we should probably import those as well. And since they come from REST framework, I can just do those next to keep all my imports consolidated. So from REST framework .status imports HTTP. We'll probably need 201 for created whenever we create a new user. We should have HTTP 400 or 404 for not found in the event we try to grab the info for a user or grab a user and we can't find him and he doesn't exist. We should probably also have HTTP 204 no contents when we update something and we don't expect anything to come back to us, or if we delete something. These are just some basic statuses, right? There's definitely more that we can use, and if we need anything else, we will import them as such. And then we have some new imports that we will see today that will allow us to handle the authentication for our. I know throughout the entire Django journey, there's been so many different imports. I highly recommend create a cheat sheet that lets you know what imports are for what and where they come from to allow you building your project a lot smoother, or for your personal projects, it will relieve a lot of headache instead of trying to scour through the curriculum looking for all these imports, right? So definitely recommend that. I think Juan was doing something very similar to this. So get with Juan if you don't have that, if he's willing to share, of course. But the new imports we have that we are seeing today is going to be from REST framework. It's going to be auth token .models, and I'm importing the token model. This is what's going to allow me to create an instance of a token. The next import is also from REST framework. This is from the authentication side of REST framework. And I want to import token authentication. This is what I'm going to use to ensure that only people that have tokens can do certain views, right? So only people who have tokens should be able to log out. There's no reason why Owen is trying to log out Jesus from his account if he doesn't have a token, right? And this is how we enforce that relationship. And we'll see that at work in a bit. And the next import is going to be REST framework .permissions import is authenticated. And this goes hand in hand with a token authentication, right? One ensures it has a token, and the other one ensures who that token belongs to. So these go hand in hand together. And that should be enough to get us started. Now, let's go ahead and create our class for signup. So class signup, I'm going to import API view because it is a view. And then because we are creating a new user when we sign up, what method should we use?
Post.
A post request, correct. We're going to want to make this a post. It takes itself because it's a part of a class. And the only thing we need here is the request, right? There's nothing within the URL patterns that that we're going to use besides what comes within the request body. Now, on my client, we mentioned that they are submitting a form where they input their email and password, right? My client creates a post request using Axios or whatever other method they want to use. That request comes to me, and now I have this nice little package that we are calling request. And inside there's a couple things, right? On top of the package, we see the URL path that's letting us know, hey, this is coming to me as a sign up. I can see that on this address, it's saying, hey, this is a post request, so I want to create something. So I know where I should handle this. I should handle that within my sign up post request method. And then inside my package, I have a bunch of data. How do I grab that data?
Or request data.
Yeah, request.data. All right. So request.data, right? So we would say something like data is equal to request.data, and we will grab it. All right, so that's how we originally grab data. So data, but we want to make sure that it's a copy because we don't want to corrupt the original data or manipulate it in any shape, way, or form. So now we have our data copy. And there's something that we have to do here very specifically. As you guys recall, our model requires a username. It requires a username, right? But I don't want my client to handle a field called username. I'm using the word email address to be very specific. That way the user knows what they should add within this field. So when this comes to me, the data will probably have a field called email address, right? It will probably have email address and password because that's how I want my project to work, my application, right? I want my application to take email addresses to create a user. But as we mentioned, the user model requires the field called username. So we have to manipulate this data a little bit. This is why we create the copy. We're going to say data, and then I'm going to add a field called username. That way I can pass this to my model and it knows that, what it should be, the username. And then what I'm going to assign into it is going to be the field within my data that's email. Once again, I'm going to repeat what I just said. When my client puts in this request, the way I want to handle it from my front end is that they should be able to grab a field called email address and a password, right? That way my front end, my client, my user knows that it should be giving me an email. But on my back end, I need to take that email and assign it to a field called username because that's how my model works. So I do the functionality in the background, but my front end, all it has to worry about is just giving me an email address. Do we understand this concept?
Just for my curiosity, can we also use just data, square brackets email there, or no?
Yeah, we could do that. I'm doing this specifically just so I don't get you guys confused by seeing data like 3 different times. But you could do that, yes.
And then we wouldn't need to do a dot copy as well if we're using it from request data, right?
This part right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not manipulating the original request data here. We're just grabbing the email address from there and using the information that we get back from it to assign it to our copy. Right? This isn't manipulating anything. It's just grabbing some information so we can use it, but still not adjusting the original data. Make sense, Juan? All right. So we have our data. All right. Now, one thing that I recommend doing, it's not on the curriculum. It's mainly for your sake as a developer, but I would recommend doing something like this, right? If not email or not password, right? We'll have to call the data. If not data email or not data password, then I should raise a validation error. Right? I don't have it imported, which is why I'm getting this squiggly line. And then maybe do something like error and say that email and password are required. For you as a developer, when you're working on this, for your front end as well, you can do something like this to get a much easier error, and it helps you figure out what's the issue, right? And you might, well, won't it give me an error anyways, Roger, if I don't add a username and password? Absolutely, it will, right? But you get that long like list of like 20, 30 different inputs, a bunch of random jargon, and you're not exactly sure what's going wrong. This, as a developer, makes debugging easier for you. So you could do this. You could be a little bit redundant and add something here to check. It's not in the curriculum. It's not required, but it's just something I want to point out there if you wanted to try it. That'll alleviate some headache later on in your code if you're running into issues, right? But to ensure that I'm sticking to the curriculum, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and kind of print it out to make sure it's doing what we want it to do. Let's go ahead and return response. I'll give it true so I don't get an issue. And then I'm gonna go ahead and print out my data parameter here. I have to run server. Okay, I'm getting an issue because the other classes log out. So I have these in my past, but obviously they aren't created, so it's giving me an issue. So let's go ahead and create those real quick so it doesn't yell at me. Right, I have that in here, right? And it was telling me, hey, like, what is this? You added these in your code, but I don't know what it is. So I just go ahead, I went ahead and create them, but they do nothing as of right now. And I believe it's running now. Let me just do it again. Run server, sign up as view. I put something here back. There we go. URL. All these plurals and singular things are really getting to me. The URL probably does not appear to have any patterns in it. Pokédex project URLs. I'm sorry. URL patterns. Trainer app. URL patterns. There we go. Right. It's very nitpicky. Right. If you add an S here, even though like it's still URL patterns. It's looking specifically for URL patterns, right? Verbatim. So it was yelling at me. So I do apologize for that. There we go. Just some small like grammatical errors. But now we're running. Let's go ahead and open up Thunder Client. I'm going to start a what? Is it because I have too many of these? What? I'm sorry. My Thunder Client hates me. Let me go ahead and stop the recording real quick so I can set up. All right, so before we went on that small break, I was getting an issue with my Thunder Client not working with VS Code. So we are now using Postman, which does the exact same thing as Thunder Client. I do have here the URL to my server. I created a post request. I went into the raw table with JSON and I added the data that we are trying to grab. I put in the post request. I get a 200 OK and the true that's was added to my response. And now we see here, I am printing something out where it says email, password, and username, right? So it was successfully done. We have here the username is now to email. We might want to change this so we don't have redundancy in here. So I believe to update a field, correct me if I'm wrong. So I update a field. I think it's the word update. Right. We see here that I'm getting back email, password, and then also username. But we might just want to use one specific thing. So it doesn't give me that issue. Let's try it out. All right, so we have our data here. So far, it's working. We do have our email and we do have our password. So let's go ahead and see how that works. So it's printing out. I'm able to grab my data. I am receiving that post request to this endpoint. We are now going to create a trainer. Right. Let's do lowercase trainer is equal to, and I'm going to use that trainer model that I imported. The objects dot creates underscore user, right? And this is unique here, guys. You've probably seen trainer or like a specific model dot objects dot creates, and it created an object for you. But for a user, you need to specifically give it underscore user so it knows that it is a user type, right? And this will assist you with the creation of it. If you don't add underscore user, it's going to have some weird functionality where it's not going to recognize the user in your database. This will create my trainer, and all I'm going to do is pass in the data, and I will use the 2 asterisks to let it know to grab all the information from data and add it into my fields. And this is essentially the exact same thing as saying, oh no, what's going on? All right, but this is essentially the exact same thing as saying, hey, I want the username field for a model to be data username, right? And I want the password to be equal to data password, right? It just grabs this object or essentially this dictionary, right? And it spreads it out and assigns it to the variable that they belong to, right? So we do that. And this should create a user. And what should happen is we should now give our user a token, right? Going back to the drawing today, where when we grab that data, we should make a post request that takes in that user information. We create a user, and at the same time, because the user was created, we need to create a token and return that back to our clients. So next, ignore this. I do apologize. We are going to go ahead and create that token. So we say token is equal to, and now we can call that token model that we imported to create the token. So token.objects.create. And then this token takes in a user argument. And this user argument needs to be an object. So we say user is equal to trainer. Let's open up the definition of token. And we see here there are 3 fields that token has. And we kind of saw that as well in our database where it takes in a key, a user, and created something very similar to this. But when we actually create it, this is what it's supposed to take, right? The user field is what we are adding. And when we create this, it'll generate a key for us, as well as the time that it was created. All right, so user, we are assigning it the trainer object. And then once we have created our trainer and created a token, all we need to do is return response. And we're going to put this within a dictionary and say trainer, passing the trainer email. And we should also give back to our client the token so they can use it for the remainder of their time that they are logged in. But the only thing we want to give them is the key. There's other stuff that go into it. The only thing we want them to get back for the token value is the key that belongs to it. And we'll see how that works. On top of that, we also want to return a status of HTTP 201 created. Now, let's see this work in real time. So here's my post request, my sign up. Here's the information. Let's send this and see if it works. And it does work. We now have our trainer that's being returned to us, right? Just like we did on the response. We have trainer get back the email, and then we have that key of token. And we see here the token that was given to us. I'm gonna go ahead and save this because we are going to need this for the next step of logging out. Let me go ahead and open up some sticky notes where I can save this at. All right, because we don't have anywhere to store it right now, I have to kind of save it somewhere else so I can manipulate it here. All right, so that takes care of the sign up. Do I have any questions about signing up a trainer? Let me see the chat. All right. Thank you, James, for that comment for the class. If I have no further questions, let's go ahead and move forward with today's lecture, which is the handling of our logout. So I know the next thing on the curriculum is login, but I'm going to do logout first, and then we can do the login portion. So we can use this user that we just created back to back. So we have our sign up. Next, let's go ahead and tackle the logout. So our sign up is using the URL path for sign up. We are now going to change our path to logout, and this will use the logout view. We can now remove this path here, and we are going to define a new method. Who can guess what we are going to do for this logout? What type of request is it?
Put
No, and it's not
Post.
delete either. I don't know why.
Post.
It's actually a post request. Correct. It is a post request.
That's what I
James.
was gonna say too. I'm gonna
Yeah.
guess it, but
I bet James is cheating, man. He's looking at the curriculum. Yeah, it is a
course.
post request. It is a post request, right? So we are going to declare a post request. Just like before, it's taking itself and request. And the way that we are going to log out this user is they should have a token already, right? So we want to grab that token. So to grab it, we have to use the request, right? We're going to call the user within the request. And I am going to grab his token and call the function delete. Right? This might seem a little bit difficult to understand. So we're going to add it up here. In concept, my user has already logged in, right? He's either logged in or signed up and he has the token, right? So when he uses this, he needs to be authenticated. Well, how do we make sure he's authenticated? Well, on top of the logout method, we create new variables, and one of them is going to be authentication classes. Notice how he already pre-filled it for me. It knows what I'm about to use because it's a user with a token. All right. Authentication classes. Well, what do I want to make this authentication be? This view needs to be a token authentication view. That means if anyone uses this logout view, they need to have a token, right? So when this view runs, it's going to run this method here, authentication classes. What type of authentication am I using? I'm using token. And check the request that is calling this view, right? Because when we put in a request, it's being routed with the path. And what's assigned to that path? This specific view. So all this is within that request. So it checks that request. And in that request, it should also have a token, right? Whenever you do this in your client and you try to log out, that client needs to return to us a token. So I know that the person trying to run this view or access this endpoint is authenticated. So that request will have the token within the request itself. And that's what we do here on line 26. We're grabbing that post request that the front end made. We're grabbing the user. The user has a one-to-one relationship with the auth token model. Do you guys remember that? When we checked the model for the token, there was that that user column, and we saw that there was a or a one-to-one connection with them. That's what that is doing. It's grabbing the user object, right? It's grabbing the field of auth token that was assigned to it whenever that one-to-one connection was made, and then we're calling the delete method to completely remove it from our database. On top of the fact that we have this type of authentication class, we need to add another field, and this is called the permissions classes. And this permission is the is authenticated. And like I mentioned to you guys before, these two go in hand. This one's saying, hey, the type of authentication I'm using is token, and the permission class is verifying that token. Do I have any questions about these 3 lines of code? Yes, Owen.
So where are the authentication classes and permission classes stored when you log in to where that logout is accessing them?
Where is the classes stored? Well, these
Like
come.
on your line 23 and 24, where are those coming from?
Yeah, we imported those at the very top from REST framework, right? These are let's hover over them and go to definition. This is a class. It's a simple based token authentication, right? So clients should authenticate by passing the token key in the authorization header, right? The authorization header that goes back to the request. Requests have different headers as we've seen. right? They can have authorization headers. They can have a body within it. So whenever this request is being made to the client on the Axios request, they will add a header section. And that header, they will create a header called authorization, and they will assign that token, right? What token authentication is doing, it's grabbing that token that's within the authorization header. Make sense?
So there's an authentication header and there's an authorization header?
No, it's just one header. It's called authorization.
Okay.
Right. The whole process is called authentication, right? But what token authentication is doing, right? The name of the method, it's checking the authorization header that's coming from that request, right? To see if there's a token on this header. Make sense, Owen?
Yeah.
Let's look at the other one. We have is authenticated. Allows access only to authenticated users, right? So let's break that down. When an Axios request is made of type post to the endpoint of logout, they're sending in this request that has that URL path, and it has a header that's called authentication. In that header, there is a token. When it runs the logout view, this line 23, what this is going to do is going to check that request, is going to go into its headers, and it's going to look for the authorization header to verify that there is a token in there. This line here will allow the rest of the code to run only if this passed. If this passes and there is a token, then permission classes knows that you are an authenticated user. And I will allow you to pursue with the remainder of this request. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I was just confused because it's like if you're already logged in, wouldn't you assume that you already have those? But
yeah, but how does your code know you're logged in? That's what this is doing. Okay. This is what's verifying that you are logged in and authenticated. Make sense? Yes, James. Yeah, I think it's James. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm tracking correctly on line 27 when you was going over user.auth_token. That's coming from the user's models.py, and it's got a relationship with auth token. What you were saying?
Correct. It's grabbing the user that's coming from the request, right? The user has a one-to-one relationship with the auth token model, right? And then it's deleting it. We can see that in action here when we do /d auth. Actually, I don't remember the name of the model. We have auth token, right? This is the auth token model. This is saying that this is an auth token model, and this is a token object. And then we have a trainer app trainer. Let's see, auth token. I think it was auth token. There we go. Right. Notice here that this token model has a column called user ID. This is a foreign key. It is a many-to-one relationship. Who does it have that relationship with? The user ID within the trainer app trainer, right? It's saying user because that's essentially what our trainer app is. We've inherited from the user model. That's why it knows that user is trainer. But yeah, the token has that relationship here, right? If we look at the trainer app trainer, we don't see in here directly, but I think we can see it down here. Let's see if we can find it. Here we go. The trainer or the user table, right, is being referenced by the table auth token. There's a constraint between these. It's saying there is a foreign key relationship here, right? it was initiated by the token itself, right? But remember, how do we access the relationships between different models, right? There is a related name that gets assigned into the other model that we are connecting it to, right? That user model has a related name that it can use to access the relationship between itself and the token. That related name is called auth token. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It would be nice if you would be able to kind of like show us over there in your files.
Unfortunately, I can't show you the token file, but we can kind of try to do how it works, right? We don't see the model because we didn't create it ourselves, right? We installed it in our app, right? The model is installed here, auth token. So we don't visually see it in a file because we didn't create it, right? But essentially what this is, I can kind of recreate it as best as I can, is something like this, right?
But
And
user is referencing trainer class.
correct. All right, so this is essentially user, right? It's smart enough to know because we are inheriting from the abstract user. The trainer is a user object. Make sense?
So it's because of the abstract user is calling it user, maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. The auth token, we installed it, we imported it, so we don't have it in code. But essentially, what's happening underneath the hood is there's a class called auth token, and we saw that here. What does it look like? Let me see if I can find it. Auth token, right? We see it has 3 fields. It has key, created, and user ID. And this user ID field, there's something like this: models dot 1 to 1 field, right? And then it is referencing the trainer model, and that is it, right? There is no specific related name here because it's a one-to-one connection. If we are using a many-to-one, if user ID was a many-to-one, it would look like this: foreign key, trainer, and this will require a related name, and it'll be something like, tokens, right? If it was a many-to-many, it would also have a related name. And we saw this when we were using the Python shell to check the relationships, that the only one that did not need a related name was the one-to-one field, because we were able to grab the relationship by calling the name of the model directly, right? But because there's so many of these for the many-to-one and the many-to-one and many-to-many, these required a related name. If this was a related name, what trainer would have would be something like this, where it was like tokens is equal to, and then this will return to me like a query set, right? Where we have like token 1, token 2, token 3, right? But because we don't have a query set, we don't need that related name. So the way to access the relationship between a one-to-one relationship is just by saying trainer.auth token, right? And we already established that trainer it's inheriting from abstract user, so it's using user.auth token. Does that explain it, James? A little
Yes,
better?
sir. Yes,
Awesome.
sir. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. We're gonna take a pause. It's 11, 10-minute break. We'll continue when we return. All right, welcome back, guys. We're gonna go ahead and continue from where we left off, which was the logout method. All right, so we are grabbing the user object that's coming back. We grab its auth token, and then we delete it. And that's honestly the main gist of how we essentially log out from our user. The next thing is to return a response. And we are going to say return response. And all the the only thing we have to do is return HTTP 204 no contents, right? So in your client, whenever you log out a user, when you verify that the user is actually logged out and you're ready to actually go to the logout page, right? When you put in the request, you should be waiting for a status report of HTTP 204 no content, and that will allow you on your client to go ahead and navigate to your logout screen and dump the token out of your local storage or wherever you're holding it, right? That'll conclude logout. Do I have any quick questions before we move on to log in? Actually, we can see that in play because we didn't do that. So we have the sign up. We signed up, right? And technically, this user is still in. We are creating a post request for our logout method, right? And the URL point for this is different because we're logging out. We know that we need to grab the token from a header that's called authorization, right? Let me see if I remember how I do this. There we go. I saw it coming in. Authorization. Sorry, I've yet to work with Postman in such a long time. I did not expect this to, bite the dust on me in the middle of class. And then in here, we're going to add the token that we are trying to use to log out with, right? Because it needs to authenticate per the method that we assign here on the logout class. It's looking for the authentication token there under the field of authorization, right? And now when I send this request, the request will send this URL path to my server with the headers of authorization. It's bringing in my token. My server will grab that request. The authentication classes is going to grab the token. The permissions class will give you a yay or nay, whether you can continue with the push request. It sees that the authentication class was able to retrieve that token, so therefore it moves forward with the rest of the code. It deletes your token from the database, and then it returns 204 no content. And let's watch that at work. And we see here 204 no contents. Right? Do I have any questions on how the logout method works? All right, moving on to the login. So now that we logged out, we have the user. I believe we can come back here and we should be able to say select all from trainer app trainer. And we see here that my trainer does exist, right? First name and last name, it's a little skewed because of how much data there's in here. Also, I don't have we never gave him a first name or a last name. We didn't add those fields. Notice that there is staff, is false, is active, is true. We have a password, which is essentially hashed in our database, right? Going back to what James said, whenever we create that user, it essentially hashes our password in here. We do have the username, and I believe there should be an email field, which is right here. I apologize if this isn't really readable. Actually, I don't need the client, so maybe this is better. There we go. But yeah, that's how it looks like in the backend. Now let's go ahead and log in. So we have our logout function. In my login, I'm going to create a new method, and this is also going to be a post request, a takes itself, and a request. Well, how do we log in? Well, it's fairly similar to how we essentially created our initial signup, right? We should be able to have an email field, and we should have a password field, which we are going to use to actually log our user. So for our email, we're going to want to say request.data.get, and I am looking for the email field within my body of my request. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for password, but we are getting the field password. So we have our email, and we have a password. We are not going to create the user like we did here because he already exists. What we have to do now is authenticate him to make sure it actually does exist in our database. And then if he does exist, we will now create a new token for him, which we can use to sign him in, right? And to authenticate him, we are going to use a method that comes from the default version of Django's authentication method. Right, this is coming from Django.contrib.auth. We're going to import that in our views. At the very top, I'm going to say from Django.contrib.auth. I'm going to import a method called authenticate. I'm going to import the method authenticate. And this method is going to take in the email and the password. It's going to use that to grab our database and query a user if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it will return none to us. So with that method, we come back to our view and we're going to say trainer is equal to authenticate. It's looking for a username, of course, and we've already declared that we are using our email as the username. So we pass in the email. And it's expecting a password, and this will take in the password that we got from our body. And then we have to say if trainer, and we say that because, as I mentioned, the authenticate is going to do one of two things. One, it's going to return to me a trainer object, or it's going to return none if it does not exist. Right, so we say if trainer, therefore it's checking if it's none or if it's actually something. If it is something, then I want to create a new token. So I do token, comma, created. I will call the token object that I called earlier on the sign up. I say token dot objects dot get or create. Right? Get or create. In the event he does have a token already, it would grab it. He shouldn't have it because he had logged out. But in the event he does, it'll grab it. And we know that token objects require a user from when we open up the definition of it. So it's going to take in the trainer object. So it takes in the trainer object and it'll get a token from him if it exists, or it's going to create one for him. Right. And what this is saying is going to have the time of when it was created. Right. We saw that as well from the definition. We have key, user, and created, right? This returns to us the token itself and the time that it was created. And then we say else return response. And if we couldn't create token, it should say something like no trainer matching credentials. All right. We don't want to say like invalid username or invalid password. We just want to say no trainer matching credentials. That way we don't explicitly tell the client that, hey, you're on the right path, but you got the wrong password. We just say, hey, your credentials don't match. It might exist or not, but as of right now, they don't match. And then, like always, we return a status report of HTTP 404 not found. So let's go ahead and open up our Postman. We are creating a post request to log in. It doesn't have a token, right? Because we were trying to log in. We just got to our website to start the day. We have yet to log in a while. We don't have the token. The client, right, has a form for the login page that in this form it's requesting an email and a password. So I have it in here. And when we send this, I am not running my server, I believe. I am running my server. Expected a response. Oh, my bad. I did not add the response if it did succeed. Return response. If it does succeed, then we should return the token, just like we did before. We give it the token key. And then we can also return the trainer email. Trainer.email. Let's try that again. Name response. I got a typo. Spelled response wrong. Thank you. Response. Once again, third time's the charm. There we go. We now have our token. We have the trainer email. It was successful. We have a status code of 200. Let's go ahead and copy this. I'm gonna go ahead and log back out because I no longer need this. Log out. It does not require a body, so I can go ahead and comment this out. On the headers, we have the authorization header. We have a new token for this session, so we're gonna go ahead and replace that. And I have an issue. Change your form to point to. Oh, my / my bad. There we go. So I am now logged out. Let's go ahead and log back in and see what that looks like in our database. So log in. I have my information. I got my token. Let's check the database, see what it looks like. I might not be able to see it here. Let's go ahead and select all from auth token. There is a token in here, right? When it was created at 12:22, I have the wrong timeline. But see for user ID, let's go ahead and log out. We need to have the token in here for logout, right? Because only people that are logged in should be able to log out. So let's replace this token. Let's go ahead. I don't think I'll get an issue here, but even so, let's comment this out. It says my authorization header was not provided. There we go. Now it's taking it in. No content. Let's go ahead and query this again. And we see that there's no longer a token in my database. Do I have any questions about logout, login, or signing up? All right, pretty straightforward. Last but not least, we're going to talk about getting info. What do you think we should probably have on the info if we're trying to grab the info of a user?
Their email.
Their email, but what else should be in here that we talked about like before we went on break?
There, you mean like the type of, what do you call it? Like if we want to use post or whatever, or is it like something more specific?
Yeah. A user should not be able to grab its email if it's not authenticated, right? So we probably want to also add that in here. What we can do as well is maybe create a class for the token authentication, where we can do class token requirement, and we can add an API view. And then all we do in here is add what we've been calling everywhere else. So we would have to add this to every single method or every single view that needs to be authenticated, but to not constantly add it in there, what we can do is we can make a token requirement that inherits from the API view. And then this class, we add it within our other view, token requirement. And that allows this view to inherit the fact that it needs authentication. And it's also inheriting from the API view that token requirement inherited, therefore making it a view. And that gets rid of this extra step here, where we have to add that. And the reason I show you this is because who should grab specific Pokemons? Should James grab Gary's Pokemons? No, they should be authenticated, right? They should have their own individual token. So what would happen once you create your users, for the rest of the endpoints in all those views, you will probably have to add authentication to those too, to make sure that only those specific users can grab their respective Pokemon. And I show this so that way you can go back to your other models later on and add this to them, right? Because you're gonna have to keep adding this to every other method that needs to be authenticated. So this kind of gives you a little shortcut to do that. But essentially, info needs to be authenticated because only the person that has that info will be able to retrieve the information, right? So that takes care of the authentication process. Now we can go ahead and create our method, which is going to be a get method because we want to grab the information that belongs to the user. And I'll take a pause. Yes, Owen?
So you wouldn't need to inherit from API view at all in your info class?
We are, right? Token
Okay,
requirement is inheriting from API view.
Cool.
And then we are inheriting token requirement.
I
And in
missed that,
turn,
sorry.
it's okay. And in turn, we have both, right? So we knock out two birds with one stone. It's authenticated and it's still the view. Now back to the get method for info. This should take in a self, to the class, and a request like everything else. And then all we have to do is return response. We can pass in the email and return the user email. And if there's anything else that you want to return from the user, you could do that here. You know, you could do the Pokemon, you can do their date of birth, whatever you want to do, right? And let's see that in action. Let's go ahead and log in. I'm not using a token because I'm logging in for the first time. I log in. Let's go ahead and grab this token. I'm gonna add it to my headers. I'm trying to grab the info that belongs to this user because he is logged in. And we see here that whenever I put a GET request to this endpoint for info with the authorization that belongs to that user, I'm able to grab his information. Do I have any questions on any of the endpoints that we have covered up to this point? Owen.
So with that being said, could we, instead of inheriting from API view on logout, also inherit from, I can't remember what you called it, the
token requirement I created?
Token requirement, yeah. Just to make that easier and then take out those top two. Oh, you already did.
I already did, my friend. Already. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, right? Now, that will conclude the actual part of our authentication. We covered the registration portion of it, right? The signing up. We went over how to log in a user. We talked about how to grab the information for that user, and then we were able to log them out successfully. For the imports, right, this is coming from the default app that comes with Django, and this allows us to authenticate the user, authenticate checks our database, the password and username that we give in to our request, and make sure it exists and allows us to create a token for them. Right. That's where that came from. We have some imports from REST framework for the API to user response, as well as the statuses. Right. We use the token import to create the token, and we use token authentication and is authenticated to ensure that whenever someone tries to put in some kind of request, that only people that have been authenticated and have a token can access that specific information. And here we're going to talk about super users. Sorry, I almost forgot that. So we have regular users, but what if we want to make some kind of admin that can handle stuff that regular users shouldn't handle? Well, let's create a quick endpoint for that. This is fairly similar to creating a regular user, just it takes some extra requirements. Admin user. And this is going to include, oh, my bad, I'm in the wrong urls.py. I need to go here. It's going to be for the admin user or super user. This is admin user / and then this would be super user or whatever you want to call this. We call it admin. Admin user dot as view with a name of admin user. All right. Admin user. And let's put it by our sign up class, admin user, API view, right? And we are going to create a user that has extra requirements. And we show this because once you install or create your own customized user, if you try to go use the admin site, you're not going to be able to use it. Right, because the admin site is only for administrative purposes. For admin users, this is a default user. There might be stuff that you want to create an admin for. That way, he can only access certain requirements. This is the people that are gonna run your site, right? So you should be able to create a super user, and it is fairly similar to everything else. We are going to create a variable called master trainer, or master user, whatever you want to call this. It will still use the same model as a regular user, but we will update some of the settings. All right, we are using the information that's coming from the request body. Probably good practice to still do this part if you guys want to. I'm just going off the curriculum, but you could probably do an email as well and save it to the username. And once you create that object, the difference between this and sign up is you are going to call some specific variables that are assigned to it, which we saw in the table within our database. We saw some columns that were like is staff, right, or is super user, and those were set to false, right? Well, here we are going to set them to true. Yes, one.
Sorry, I might have missed it. Why is it star's request dot data this time instead of just star data like you have above?
Because above I created a copy of the data to save an email to it and to our username. I'm not quite sure why the curriculum is not doing it. We can definitely do that. It is good practice, right? Where we can do the exact same thing here, where we grab the email and save it to a username. I don't know why it diverted. I can find out for you, but that's why we're doing request.data, because here we save the data copy into a data variable. Here we're just grabbing the data directly and just passing it in, which is why this is request.data. Does that make sense to you, Juan? I'm not quite sure why this diverges from the same path. They should be similar. I will find answer for it to you for why this was done the way that it was done. I'm just showing. I have to teach the curriculum, right? But this is how they taught it. I'm sure Francisco had a really good reason of why it was done, right? But then after we change the settings of its staff and its super user, everything else stays the same. We do .save here because we updated the changes. Here we didn't update anything, so we didn't have to do .save. We created it here, but then we also made some changes after it was created. So now we have to save those changes. We then create a token using the same method as before, token.objects.create. It takes in the user, and this is going to be a master trainer. And once he is created, we return the response of master trainer email, and the token. And after I do this, we'll refactor the code to make it look like sign up to see how that looks. Status equals HTTP to one created. Right. Practically the exact same thing as a sign up. The biggest difference is the sole fact that we are changing certain attributes within our object to give them certain capabilities. I think we kind of see this somewhere here. I do not. Before I do that, let's go ahead and check it out. The trainer, app trainer. Right, these are the fields that come with our user. And notice they have its staff and its super user. By default, these are set to false, right? We can select all from trainer, app trainer, and we see that the one that we created before, its staff is set to false, and its super user is set to false. So for the admin user, all we are doing is changing those attributes within our database to create a user that has other privileges that our regular users do not. Let's go in here and let's call this admin user. This will be a post request. It's going to take a body. I'm going to say, we'll make Francisco. And now we get an error. Why do we get an error? I knew it. I absolutely knew it. Okay, here we go. We are getting this issue here where it's missing an argument of username. I'm glad it showed me that. All right, let's go ahead and actually do it how I did it earlier, where we said data is equal to request.data.copy data username is equal to request.data email. And let's change this to data. We send this, and now it works, right? Our model is expecting that username. I'm not quite sure, guys, why the curriculum diverges from there. I will bring it up, but yeah, the exact same thing as sign up. The only difference is this right here, guys. The its staff and its super user being changed. Do I have any questions? Yes, Owen?
Is there, so based on like you going into, it's not PC client, but what's it called? Your other interface to go into your server?
My admin site?
Yeah, your admin site.
Yeah, let's check it out.
So no, not the admin site, but the
He's talking about Postman.
Postman.
Oh,
Yes,
Postman?
thank you. You, like anybody, any Joe Blow could put in that URL path. Wouldn't you want that to have some sort of extra authentication for someone to make an admin user account?
Um,
'Cause
that
then
is
anybody could, like, if they were smart enough, they could just type in that admin tech user file path or URL path and then make their own admin user.
that is a really good question. I don't know how to answer that. Well, when we set this up in our front end, right? Um, we will create a space for admin users, right? That would handle this. But you are right. What if someone was able to identify the URL path and get to that location and figure it out? I will get back to you on that. That's actually a very, very good question, Owen. That's such a curveball. I'm actually curious myself of how that would work and how we can you know change that. Maybe just making this very, very unique endpoint could change that. Maybe not making it something that's very typical like admin user could fix that. But
Yeah,
thank
but
you for
even
that.
then, like, they could make a script to randomize URL paths, and eventually they're going to find it.
Yeah, I
So
mean, you
I
make
feel
good
like
point.
there's got to be some sort of authentication to make, or a way to implement some sort of authentication to make an admin user account.
Yeah, you really got me there. I will find out for you because now I am really curious on how we could do that. So that'll be my job during lunch, and I'll get back to you. Does that work for you, Owen? Awesome. Thank
Absolutely.
you. I see your message, the Caleb. You're good. I appreciate the heads up. But good stuff, guys. That takes care of literally everything that's within our curriculum. If I try to come here and I did Roger at Platoon and I added 1, 2, 3, notice that I'm gonna get an issue here. But if I do Francisco at coplatoon.org and add 1, 2, 3, he has access to the admin site, right? So if you guys want to use this for your application and you don't know why, it's probably because the user you created can't have access to it. The moment you create a new user and you change your settings, it becomes an issue, right? So just be aware of that. All right. We have 17 minutes left of class. Does anybody have any questions that maybe did not, they didn't understand well that we can kind of go over? This is the time.
Roger, I just kind of have a question.
Yeah.
Like, I guess conceptually, so you do your login and it's authenticated. How does it know to, I guess, send you now to like the actual home of the website or your application? Is that
That's
just like part of what it's doing?
No, that's part of your front end, right? So whenever you're in the login screen, you will set up your page. So whenever they press that, submit button or login button, it makes an access request to your backend. It'll specifically route you if it's a sign up. What you would do is you will set it up so that form puts in a post request to the sign up URL point. It'll go through all this, and what you do in your front end is set up the functionality. So like once that function is finished running, right, you get that response from the backend saying, hey, here's your token, and it's good. Then on your front end, you would do it where you will route it to a different page to take you to the homepage or profile for that user. And then you would do another GET request from there, right? Once it gets there, you would put in a request for like your info. And then you can grab all the Pokemon that belong to that profile user, right? Does that make sense? And notice that info has a token requirement that we added here. So the info needs to be authenticated. So once it routes you to the profile, it's going to use that token that you grabbed to make every other subsequent request that comes forward. But that profile page will put in that info GET request using the token that was given to you to give you your information, to give you your profile, your libraries, to give you your playlist if it was it was Spotify, if it was the Pokédex project and you deployed it to give you the Pokemon that belong to you. And that makes a good question. Oh, Roger, I have my user, but how does this relate to my Pokemon? Well, now you would come to your Pokemon app into models. And what do you think you'll probably do into models?
You would like, I guess, like doing like API view here and then like pull the information you need from it.
No, not exactly. Here, you might want to come down and do something like trainer, or trainers is equal to models
Oh,
dot
gotcha.
foreign key, right? And
Yep.
then this, you'll make some kind of relationship to your user. That way you can start giving trainers Pokemon, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
And then that gets added to the user info. Any question, guys? That's why it's also good to do your user first. That way, once you get to your Pokemon models, you can add those relationships of how it's supposed to relate. How, should trainers have one-to-one relationship with Pokemon, many to one, many to many, so on and so forth. Right? You can start signing them from there. I see Gary. I just need that code push. Gonna work on that tutorial sample. See you guys during lunch. Good stuff. Good stuff. Any other questions? All right. If I have no further questions, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.